I almost didn't go. Not because of what he said. I'd heard variations of it before, softer versions dressed up as concern, sharper ones delivered in passing, but because of how easily everyone else agreed. As if it were practical, as if it made sense to rearrange a person like furniture to suit the room. "You'll understand," my foster mother had said, smoothing the front of my jacket as if that gesture could soften the rest. "It's just for one evening." One evening, I thought, as if time could contain the feeling. The house was larger than I expected. Not extravagant in a loud way, but deliberate, every detail chosen to signal permanence. The kind of place where nothing is accidental. Not even where people are placed. I was shown through the kitchen. No one said anything unkind. That would have been easier, in a way. Instead, there were polite nods, a quick glance at a list, then a gesture toward a smaller table set off to the side. Not hidden, exactly. Just separate, close enough to see the main dining room if you leaned slightly, far enough to remain irrelevant. I sat where I was told. From that angle, I could see my brother's profile through the doorway. He looked comfortable. Confident even. I tried to map his posture onto the boy I grew up with, the one who used to leave cabinet doors open and forget where he put his shoes. This version of him was sharper around the edges, as if he'd filed down anything that didn't fit. He didn't look toward the kitchen. I folded my hands in my lap, then unfolded them. There was nothing to do but wait. Conversations floated in and out, fragments of introductions. Laughter that came a second too late to feel natural. I recognized the rhythm, people performing ease. It reminded me of faculty dinners. That thought stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because it was comforting, but because it felt like a line I wasn't supposed to cross. A part of myself I'd agreed, silently, to keep out of this room. I had done that before. Many times. Adjusted the way I spoke, left out details, accepted assumptions because correcting them would take too much effort, or shift the atmosphere in ways people resented. It wasn't new. Just clearer tonight. Someone placed a glass of water in front of me. I thanked them. They smiled without really looking at me, already moving on. The door to the main dining room opened wider at some point. I hadn't noticed when. Voices grew closer, more distinct. A man's voice, steady and measured, carried through the space. Not loud. But the kind that didn't need to be. He moved with the ease of someone accustomed to being listened to. I didn't turn immediately. There's a habit you develop, sitting on the edges of things, you learn not to draw attention unless it's necessary. But then the conversation shifted. Chairs moved. A pause, longer than the others. Footsteps came toward the kitchen. I looked up out of instinct, not expectation. He stopped a few feet from the table. There was a brief moment where his expression didn't change at all. Then something in it sharpened. Not confusion, exactly, but recognition aligning with context. "Professor Cole," he said, slower now. "I didn't realize you'd be here." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The name settled into the room in a way nothing else had. The person standing next to him, one of the hosts, I assumed, looked between us, searching for something to anchor to. "You know each other." I stood, more out of habit than intention.
"We've met,"
I said. My voice sounded even, which surprised me. He gave a small, almost incredulous smile. "You reviewed my clerkship paper 3 years ago," he said. "You were thorough." There was a flicker of something else there. Respect, maybe. Or memory. Behind him I could see my brother now. Not clearly, just enough to recognize the way his posture had changed. Less certain. As if he were recalculating something that no longer fit. The room had quieted, though no one had asked it to. "I wasn't aware you were part of the family," the man said. It wasn't an accusation. But it wasn't neutral either. I could have answered in a dozen different ways. Explained the arrangement. Clarified the relationships, filled in the gaps so everyone could reorganize their understanding of the situation. Instead, I said, "I'm here for dinner." A simple statement. True, and incomplete. He studied me for a moment, then nodded, as if accepting both the answer and everything it left unsaid. "Well," he said, turning slightly to include the others, "we should make sure you're properly accommodated." It was the word properly that shifted things, not dramatically. No one rushed. No one apologized in a way that would draw more attention. But there was a quiet reordering, chairs adjusted, a place set at the main table, a subtle but unmistakable change in how people moved around me. I didn't resist it. But I didn't hurry to fill the space either. When I took my seat, it wasn't triumph I felt. Just a kind of stillness, like something that had been held in place for too long, had finally been allowed to settle. Conversation resumed, though it carried a different weight now. Questions were directed toward me, measured, careful. I answered them the same way. No more, no less. My brother spoke eventually. Not to me. About me. Fragments of explanation that didn't quite connect. I didn't interrupt. There would be time for that later. Or not. The meal moved forward. Courses arrived and were cleared. The rhythm returned but altered. More attentive, less certain of itself. At one point the judge, I assumed, asked about my current work. I told him. He listened without interruption, then nodded in a way that felt considered. "I'd be interested to hear more," he said. I inclined my head. Of course. It was a professional exchange. Nothing more. But it anchored something in the room that hadn't been there before. By the time dessert was served, the earlier arrangement felt distant, not erased. Just untenable in retrospect. Afterward, people lingered in smaller groups. Conversations broke apart and reformed. I stepped out onto the back patio for a moment, needing the quiet. My brother followed a few minutes later. He didn't stand too close. "I didn't know," he said. It wasn't clear what he meant. That he didn't know who I was in that context, or that he didn't know it would matter. I nodded once. I figured. He let out a breath, like he was about to say something else. Then stopped. There wasn't an easy version of this conversation. No way to compress years of small decisions into something that could be resolved in a few sentences. I wasn't trying to. He started, then paused again. I didn't finish the thought for him. After a moment, he said, "I should have handled it differently." It wasn't an apology. Not fully. But it was closer than I expected. "Yes," I said. We stood there for a while, the distance between us measured, but not entirely fixed. Inside, I could hear the low hum of voices continuing without us. When I left later, no one directed me through the kitchen. I walked out the front door. No one stopped me. No one needed to. The night air was cooler than I expected. I stood on the steps for a moment, letting it settle. There wasn't a sense of victory. No clean resolution waiting at the end of it, but something had shifted. Not just in how they saw me, but in how I chose to be seen. And that, I realized, wasn't something I needed to explain to anyone.